They were sodomized, cut up, and buried under the barber shop. I grew up in a small town. Low crime, typical life. I've had the same friends for years. We all went to the same school our whole lives. I've been graduated from high school for 5 years now, and I keep in touch with several friends from then, but not many. 2 years ago, my friend Tracy contacts me through text, says that there is something creepy she has to tell me. I don't think much of this. She's always been that odd, quirky friend. She didn't fit in with high school, but I think it's because she was more mature and put together than people our age. Anyways, I invite her over to my house, which is a 10-minute walk from hers. She says she'll be right over. A few minutes later, she shows up. I'll never forget the look on her face. Pale, cold, wide-eyed. I tell her to come sit down and talk. She says that her dad received a letter in the mail. Her dad is a custodian at our high school, really sweet, quiet guy. I ask her what it's about, not realizing what I was getting ourselves into. She says her dad received a letter in the mail with no return address. His name was typed, and the letter was typed as well. She said the letter said that 2 men were sodomized, cut up, and buried in the septic system behind the barber shop. She said that it names the victims' names as well as the murderers. There were 3 of them. She didn't have the letter with her. She said she would send a picture to me tonight. I asked her if her dad had reported it to the police. She says not yet. We need to go to the barber shop. It's only a 10-minute walk from my house, so whatever. And honestly, we were just trying to freak ourselves out, have a little fun. Maybe that's weird, but whatever. We walk there, iPhones in hand, ready to take some pictures. We go to the shop. It's obviously closed as it is around 10 at night. We had to walk on the lawn to get close to the window, our faces pressed against the glass to see inside. We took some pictures of the window, tried looking in, but there's blinds in the window. He has some weird knickknacks in the window, and the sign is super old, but nothing out of the blue. Then my stomach sank. Even to this day, I get shivers up my spine. Paul was sitting in the back of the shop, directly staring at us. He was sitting slunched over in the chair, his arms dangling off the side and his feet crookedly below him. His face was scruffy with a beard, his eyes as cold as the night. He was staring directly at us. The disturbing part was that he was sitting in the complete dark. The only light from was faintly seen from a room in the back corner. The other disturbing part was that it's around 10:30 on a weekend night, and he's sitting in his shop by himself, in the dark. He didn't move. He didn't say anything. He just sat there staring at me. I mean, it is his shop. We were trespassing. He had every right to be staring at me. But the way he was just staring so deeply in me, it felt like an eternity. I knew that there was no way that he knew that we had read this letter, but I think he knew. We got to get the heck out of there. The next day I check my emails, and I find the letter in my inbox. On May 19th, 1974, victims Carl Brom and Tom Limpston were kidnapped, sodomized, cut up, and buried in the sub-tank in my father Paul Lung's barber shop, Twitch. Pete Swan Stump and Trevor Manson Butch were responsible for the deaths as well. I'm obviously freaked out by this, and decide to Google the victims' names. Sure enough, they show up on Canada's missing website, A Cold Case. I'm freaking out, but decide to send the information to Tracy. Tracy calls me and tells me that her dad took the letter to the police. A few weeks later, the police inform her dad that they had received the same letter from multiple people in our town. They used the stamp to trace back to where it was sent from, Toronto. Apparently, it was written by the daughter of the barber, who has mental illnesses. They refused to look into the case. At the time, I was working at the one and only grocery store in our town. I saw Paul all the time, and every time, he would just give me the sly smile. I knew he knew it was me who was looking in his window. So one day, I decided to confess. I walked up to him while he was in the produce. Paul, I stammered. Hey,
Just wanted to apologize for looking in your window. It was wrong of me to do that. Paul continued inspecting the cabbage, acting as if he couldn't hear me. It won't happen again, I said, as I began to walk away. I hope it does. I turn around and look at him. He stands there and gives me that sly smile. I told some of my coworkers about what happened, and an old coworker of mine told me how one time they had a garage sale, and Paul was bragging to her mom how he neutered his own dog with garden shears. So, end of story. Nothing happens. That still totally freaks me out to this day, though. But I no longer live near that town. So there's that. Haircuts. When I was younger, I was regularly taken to a barber lady who owned her shop not too far from my house. However, I suddenly was no longer brought to her specific shop. Being a child, I thought nothing of it. However, one day, I asked my dad why I never went to her for a haircut. He briefly explained that she had killed someone and went to prison. I thought little of it. Strangely, most likely because I thought he was joking. Several years ago, however, I was channel surfing the TV and decided to watch 48 Hour Mystery for a moment. The television displayed a photo of the criminal that had been talked about and, well, you can imagine who was in the picture. My jaw dropped. Apparently, when I was little, my old barber and her boyfriend had told a middle-aged couple that they were interested in purchasing their yacht. Upon touring the boat, the owners were tied to the anchor, which was then pushed overboard. They drowned, clearly. Now I just go to supercuts. He was a pervert, but his girlfriend was something worse. A little more than a year ago, when I was 19 years old, I managed a beauty supply store. We sold all kinds of hair color, nail polish, hair extensions, shampoo, and all that kind of thing. But it wasn't that often you'd see a man in there. When we did, it was usually a barber or someone's husband running an errand for them. Anyways, I was working around noon one February day, and this man comes in pushing a small child in a stroller. I asked if I can help him find something, and he asked if I had super glue. I didn't like to turn anyone away, so I asked if maybe nail glue would do the trick. So he follows me back to the nail glue and starts asking me where I'm from, and I continue to make small talk with him. He tells me he's staying at the campground with his 3-year-old son and his son's mother. They are from Las Vegas. He then asks me how old I was, and gives me his phone number and says we should hang out sometime. I take it and said, alright, maybe, just being friendly, and he leaves. I threw his number in the trash and laughed about it with my friend and coworker. The next day, my friend and I were working, and she watches the man pushing the stroller walk by the front of our store, then stop, and walk back to stare in the windows at me. When she saw him stop to walk back, she told me to go sit in the bathroom, so I did. He just looked around from the outside windows for like 5 minutes, she said. That weekend, I got in my car to leave for work, and there was so much snow I couldn't get out of my driveway. I had to walk quite a ways and catch the bus. It was about noon, and I walked through the parking lot from the bus stop, and I just felt like someone was watching me. I looked around and didn't see a lot of people, but I just had a feeling he was around. I get inside and open the store up within 5 minutes, and guess who walks in? The same guy, except this time, no kid. His friend was with him, and supposedly he was from the same state I was from. He told me his name, and I said, oh, how funny. My boyfriend's name is Corey. They did have the same name. Then the creepy dude says something like, I knew you had a boyfriend. You're too fine, like a model. Or something very similarly annoying. He proceeded to tell me that I should bring my boyfriend and hang out with them and smoke. The way he said it was like he didn't believe I had a boyfriend or something. At this point, I was done being friendly. I said, "I don't know you, so I don't think we'll ever be hang out, no offense." And he kinds of laughs and then they leave. A couple weeks later, I see him on the city bus with a woman I assumed to be his new girlfriend, and I felt relieved and didn't see him anymore. Fast forward to about a month later, I'm out of town for a company meeting, and I stop by the mall to get a pedicure. As I'm relaxing, this story comes on the news about a woman who left her 3-year-old home alone for 4 days and he died. They lived in the town I worked in. I didn't want to hear about that depressing crap, so I stopped watching. Now it's Easter. My mom was over and began our normal gossip. She says, "Oh, did you hear about that woman who left her son home for 4 days and he died?" And I told her I saw a story on the news, but didn't pay much attention to it. My mom worked at the hospital, so she knew the whole story. Also, it's a very small town. Apparently, this woman and her child were staying at the campgrounds, and they were from Las Vegas. The baby's dad was in jail for failing to register as a sex offender after soliciting sex to minors on the city bus. It all dawned on me, so I looked up the news story and looked at the pictures. It was the same man that was creeping on me at my job. That woman I saw with him on the bus was the one on the news that had killed her son. And worst of all, that little boy that smiled at me and told me his name was the little boy that died. This has bothered me for over a year now. Barbershop Creeper. This is my first time submitting anything to Reddit, but I figured it would be a good idea to share my story. I'm a fairly small girl, although I pretend my 5-foot-tall self isn't afraid of anything. I have facial piercings and brightly colored hair with an attitude to match. I started working at a gas station in one of the smaller areas of my city in March of 2013. I was 19 years old and absolutely loved my job. I had lovely regulars and 1 or 2 creepy late-night visitors ever so often, but nothing I couldn't handle on my own. Shortly after I started work, an ice cream shop and barber shop, both owned by the same family, opened up in the same plaza. Super cool, right? One day in the summer, the barber came over to the gas station, telling me that someone drove over one of the gas tank covers and it sort of flipped, leaving the pipe leading down into the tank exposed. Because the gasoline is stored in huge tanks underground, any opening in the pipes leading to them is a hazard for many reasons: sparks, rainwater, etc. Of course, knowing the risks, I was worried. I walked out with him to the crowded parking lot, and I noticed he was looking at me funny. He said something like, "You look good today," which I shrugged off as a genuine compliment. Careful not to give him the wrong impression, I just nodded and said a quick thanks. I was uneasy about the way he was looking at me, but I didn't stress too much because there were people all over the place. I quickly kicked the cover back into place, not really wanting to bend down before I thanked him, and headed back to my spot behind the service counter, knowing there would be customers waiting for service. He came back a short while later with a bowl of ice cream from his other shop and placed it down on my counter, saying, "I'm sorry for pulling you away from your work. I was just worried about someone getting hurt." I smiled and thanked him, moving the bowl over to the other side of the computer. I went to get my wallet and he promptly refused, saying all I needed to give him was a kiss. I laughed, thinking he was harmlessly joking, like most of my other elderly clientele. One sweet elderly man called me his girlfriend to all his other elderly friends. I found it quite adorable, especially since he'd asked me if I could say it so he could impress them. I joked, saying no kisses, but if I could, I would give you a hug, just assuming he knew about the rules of my workplace, as well as a general not being a creeper rules. Following the little exchange, he told me that there were some mixed up chocolate bars on his side of the counter, as well as a couple of empty boxes. My work was always very picky about the displays at the front, so, without thinking, I immediately went over to fix them. I felt his hand graze my behind, so I quickly stood up and stomped my feet on his, saying, "I think it's time you get the fuck out of my workplace and back to your own." I quickly made my way back behind the counter, and he thoroughly apologized, saying something about how he was just adjusting his apron and that he would never do such a thing. I started to feel a little like I'd overreacted, until I realized it was absolutely impossible for a vehicle to flip the tank cover. It clicked in my mind that the covers are made to be driven over, like sewage drain covers, and that without some serious force, they would not move unless lifted with the gasoline delivery pickaxe things. The barber had obviously kicked it in to get my attention. I repeated my request for him to leave, and he grabbed my arm. He said, in a very menacing sort of way, that I would have an affair with him, before smiling and walking out the door. I threw out the ice cream right away, not having touched it, and went about my business, trying to keep myself calm. The next couple of days went by without incident, but the third night, he started to drive by after I closed and locked up for the night. As I was counting my cash, he would blow me kisses and wave weirdly, or sign that he was offering me a ride home. I always pretended like I didn't see him, but I began to be on the phone with people when I closed. It escalated when I thought I saw his vehicle parked out back by the garbage bins, lights off and in the dark with someone sitting on the driver's side. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't just call people I knew. I called the police and explained what had been happening, telling them that I was afraid for my safety. They came quickly and found out it was just some kids smoking dope in a vehicle that was the same make and model as his. But I felt better knowing they had been made aware. After the police report was filed, he didn't bother me for a couple of weeks, thinking it had stopped for good. My boyfriend took me on an ice cream date after checking to make sure he wasn't in that day. The next day, I was with my friend, about 5 minutes before closing. He stormed in and practically threw a bowl of ice cream at me, spitting, "Have a great night!" and then angrily rushed off. I was very confused and scared, wondering if he knew we had gone into the shop. The next day, he walked by the pumps and looked around at each camera, then back at me with a smile and a wave. I saw on the other cameras that he was looking at the ones around the building as well. I called my dad and he picked me up that night. After that, I decided I had had enough, and the next day I went to his barber shop with an RCMP officer I know very well. I told him he was no longer welcome on the gas station premises, and if he came back while I was inside, the police would be notified. He started off by acting confused and a little hurt that I was making such awful accusations, but ended up yelling at me, telling me he would find me and hurt me because I was a slut and I would get what I deserved. I was scared because besides the one small joke I made it clear to him that he was not welcome anywhere near me. I quit my job shortly after that, and I really haven't hung around that place, besides if I needs to stop in and get gas in a rush. Moral of the story: avoid ice cream trucks and shops at all costs.